Awesome, you guys. Well, my name is Stephen Mace. I'm the Director of Operations and Lead Forecaster here at ESAC. And I'm going to kick us off today with a recap of last season, which was a big one. I feel like it just ended. So, the last season was really kind of, it was obviously one of the bigger snow years we've ever had, the biggest down here in the more southern central Sierra. And it also, for us, was interesting because it was really kind of framed by a series of persistent slab problems, which is somewhat unusual for us. And so we'll go into the reasons why. But first, I want to say thank you to all of our partners here at ESAC and then all of our donors. You know, our community sport, we could not do this without you guys. So if you've made a donation to ESAC and helped us on our mission, we appreciate you. Thank you so much. I also want to give a special shout out to these three individuals. These are our key observers. They've committed to provide us with consistent and high quality observations, and they've been on the team for several years now and couldn't do without them. So on the left side of the screen there, we got Ryan Hooter, Barbara Werner, and Jeff Unger. Huge thanks to those guys for all the information they provide. And then, of course, our ESAC staff, which we actually have some new staff I'll introduce later today. But last season, this was our staff team, 4 of us. That's me chewing on snow at the bottom right there. Everett Phillips, Clancy Nelson in the beautiful sweater, and of course, Rachel Dratler, our admin manager for the last few years. Really the one running the show. So last season, by the numbers, was a big year. We had the longest stretch of daily forecasts in ESAC's history. We had enough snow on the ground starting in the beginning of December to kick it off really that first weekend of December. And we ran all the way through the end of April, extending our usual operations by a couple weeks, given the amount of snow we had and consistent avalanche problems. As a total in the Southern Sierra, we were over 300% of average precip with over 700 inches of snow measured at the base of Mammoth Mountain. We issued 12 avalanche warnings covering a total of 19 days. And these numbers at the bottom are huge for me. We more than doubled our average public observation count last season, which if you are looking for a way to support the Avalanche Center, your observations are a great way to support us. That information is super helpful. And within that, we received over 260 avalanche observations. And I'm sure that was only a fraction of the activity that actually occurred out in the mountains. So these were the snow pillows in the Owens Valley, the Southern Sierra here, on the Eastern Sierra, excuse me. And this was at the end of April. So you can see we really kind of blew past the 16-17 record year, water year by quite a bit there, especially in the late winter. And this is a graph that shows the average temperatures by winter season over the last 70 years or so. And so one of the factors that was really huge in creating our snowpack for last season was the cold temperatures. We actually had quite a cold year. It was the coldest year in over 30 years on average. So that really helped set us up for what we saw throughout the winter. So in November, we had the season kind of kicked off. We received 60 inches of snow in the first couple weeks of November. And that was enough for people to start getting out there and start skiing. It was still relatively shallow, wasn't quite enough to have good coverage consistently throughout the range, but there were certainly areas that were providing slidable surfaces. And in the latter half of the month, we saw it dried out a little bit, remained cold, and we saw that snowpack facet out pretty well. And I think, during this time, we had issued a couple kind of preseason snowpack updates, and it was really focused on a shallow and inconsistent snow coverage. And that all changed in December. The first weekend of December, on actually the night of the 2nd of December, I believe we received over 2 feet of snow that night, which allowed us to start our daily operations, which was awesome. And in fitting for this season, we started our daily operations with high danger at all elevations and an avalanche warning. And it happened to also coincide with our kickoff event and this workshop last year. So it was a busy day. And what we saw happen right away was we dropped right into that first persistent slab problem. So this graph, you're going to see it throughout this presentation. This is by day of the year, and it's not every day. It's separated a few days in a row. And then all those vertical bars, those are precip numbers measured at the base of Mammoth Mountain. And then the brackets are kind of containing different problem cycles. So our first round of persistent slab, in this bottom bar, that is when the problem was live on the website. So the problem is on the website at the bottom. The bracket is when we saw spikes in activity. So we initiated a persistent slab problem on the 4th of December, that first round of persistent slab. And we were pretty confident in it because this is what the snowpack looked like during that time. So if you're familiar with these graphs, we had a pretty weak base, still a pretty soft slab, but really just not standing on a lot of legs there. And if you don't like graphs, this is kind of what it looked like in the field. So yeah, we saw quite a bit of activity right off the bat there. A lot of storm slab activity, wind slabs, and then these persistent slabs. We kept seeing them throughout the range early in December. We did kind of see a bit of a high pressure system mid-month, which gave us a little bit of a break. And we saw that those problem cycles kind of decrease, the amount of persistent slab activity we saw was decreasing. And that was kind of during that open area to the left of the big block of precip there. But as we went later into the month, kind of right around the holidays, this is what the weather looked like off the West Coast. So we just had one atmospheric river after another lined up, aiming right for Mammoth. So we saw a ton of precip. And that really kicked off sort of what I'm going to call persistent slab round 1.5. So still within that first round on the website, it was on the same layer in the snowpack. But we saw quite a bit of activity here, kind of starting right around the holidays and into New Year's. And this is kind of what it started to look like out there. We had this was a step down on Wilson Butte, north of Mammoth. Wind slab broke there, stepping down near the ground. We had a lot of activity that looked like this, connecting different terrain features and kind of stitching up underneath the cliffs there. This is up in the Mammoth Lakes Basin near the crest. And as we pulled into January, that New Year's storm was a bit of a warm one. So we actually saw rising snow levels through this storm, which we saw a couple times throughout the year. But this one was pretty significant because there was quite a bit of precip. We're still in that first round of persistent slab, but we started seeing a lot of bigger activity. And at lower elevations, we were seeing wet slab activity. So this is on June Mountain. This occurred, I believe, on the 2nd of January. Might have been the 3rd. But we had the rain on snow event started on the 1st, went into the 2nd before it shifted back to snow. During the rainstorm here, the rain line was right about the chalet at the top of the lift there. They actually shut the mountain down with avalanche risk in mind during the rainstorm. And they triggered these two avalanches during mitigation work the next day when they were trying to reopen. Quite an interesting avalanche to go and look at. Ran out down near to the ground, and the rain had definitely percolated all the way to the ground level. So this was actually two avalanches. The one under the lift line is a size 2 wet slab, and then on the right was a size 3. Some pretty interesting debris. This is one of my favorite avalanches of the year. This was on McGee Mountain, same time frame. And what I love about this photo is you can see the longer you look at it, the more you see here. There's dry snow avalanches, there's wet snow avalanches, there's mixed form, I'm not even sure what to call it, avalanches. But that's something we see a lot here, where we have a dry snow avalanche breaking near the summit, traveling into that rain line or into the warmer temperatures, and the debris coming out wet. That's something, because of our vertical relief here, we actually see it quite a bit. And a super fascinating subject. But one of the reasons I love this avalanche is this is what the debris did from the bottom of that wet path there. This kind of snake of debris that kept running and didn't kind of seem to me like it wasn't really following a really obvious path. It was more like one of those Play-Doh toys you had as a kid that made the shapes. January 10th, we saw this avalanche happen down in the Aspendale area. This was a wind slab avalanche that broke once again down to those facets near the ground. This was a natural avalanche. It's cross-loaded feature there at the top coming out of Jawbone Canyon. And then stepping down and running down into the town of Aspendale. And this event damaged 3 homes. Luckily, all 3 were empty at the time. So as we moved into February, things started to change a bit. We saw a decent dry spell kind of right at the beginning of the month. That's that big open block in the middle with just a couple spikes throughout. And what we saw during this time was continued really cold temperatures. It was actually really nice weather. It was really good skiing out there. You know, it's always harder to identify these in the moment, but that was sort of maybe one of the times to kind of tee off last winter. We had relatively stable snow. We had stopped seeing activity down on the ground there, but we did start to see a lot of surface faceting. So we knew that there was potential for a second round of persistent slab. And it was really kind of just waiting for the slab to form, for that snow to come, which ended up proving to be a difficult time of year for us forecasting, because we started to see these initial signs that it was coming. Like we had a really strong weak layer. So this is the time frame I'm talking about here, the kind of when the weak layer and the slab formation happened. And so this is kind of what we were seeing. These facets that you can see on the right side of your screen here, these were surface facets, and that's pretty advanced surface faceting to occur from surface influence. And then we started to see kind of small rounds of precip, 2 or 3 inches at a time, coming with a lot of wind. And we started to see smaller, more isolated activity occur. And it really needed that slab. It needed the weak layer. And then, of course, it needed a trigger. A couple of these avalanches here. This one on the left side of the screen, this was a skier triggered avalanche on Mount Tom, size 1, pretty small, fairly shallow. But this was a good sort of canary in the coal mine event that showed us that this weak layer was going to produce. And we continued to see that throughout a couple small storms. Once again, they were all pretty isolated, relatively small, and usually associated with a wind slab event. So we kept wind slab on the forecast for quite a while, even though we were hammering on that persistent weak layer, but because you kind of needed that wind event to build the slab. This photo on the right, I actually can't remember where that is, but that's a good example of the type of wind slabs you're seeing. Really hard slab activity, these isolated pockets. But we started to see, factors of these avalanches that made us think persistent slab as well. The top left there, that's Carson Bowl, and with the 2-inch storm and a ton of wind, seeing it go wall to wall like that isn't always what we expect from that type of weather input. But we were seeing these wide propagations out of those. This one on the bottom left, this is actually just right around the corner on 395, heading towards Long Valley. Great test slope right above the highway. This was a really impressive slide on that feature. It was full path width. Those chunks were like 4-foot hard slab blocks. So once again, just a pretty impressive event that was really kind of highlighting the things to come. And as we got into the end of February, the things came, and we saw 90 inches of snow in 7 days, and over 7 inches of water. And this is really kind of the beginning of the big round of avalanches we saw last year, and quite a bit of a very large activity running down on that February weak layer. So we're firmly into that February system now. This was one of the first kind of big events we saw. This was a solo skier was out skiing in Rock Creek area and triggered this remotely from 100 or so yards away. Pretty scary, size 3 avalanche. These are more examples of some persistent slab activity. We've got the shoulder of Mount Tom on the right, and Minnie Morrison in the Convict area just out there on the left. And as we got into March was when we really started seeing a lot of big stuff. We continued to see those atmospheric river events. A lot of warmer activity, especially down south. This image on the left side of your screen, that is in the Kennebec area. That's the Onion Valley Road, crisscrossing that path there. Just a massive event. This image on the right, this is Mount Tom, just the lower flanks of the mountain. And another one of those photos, the longer you look at it, the more you see in there. But just a ton of activity up and down the range. This avalanche was a good one for us, or it was a big one for us. We had, this is up on McGee Mountain, just down the road. And it really, for me, it made me kind of double check myself in a way. The perceptions we have out here on the east side can be difficult sometimes. You know, we have this huge relief, big mountains, and sometimes it's hard to conceptualize how big something is at such a distance, especially when you're kind of used to looking at the big mountains here. But looking up from the road, this was actually one of the smaller avalanches on the face of McGee that day. And I would not have guessed it was a 10-foot crown. So really grateful we got up there to take a look. And we were also able to confirm this was running on that February persistent layer. More big avalanches. This is the Navabe Ridge. Really cool crown line. And you could actually see this into April. This is on Mount Aggie. Just again up there that way. Again, just wall to wall, big crown lines. This is another one to talk about perceptions. This is one of the more impressive crown lines I saw last year. This is on the east face of Morrison. That's probably a 20-foot crown. Back to Mount Tom, I believe. And then this was down south in the Independence area. But this is kind of what we're seeing all over the place. So tons of activity. It was actually really nice for us forecasting to be able to confirm so much big activity during storm events. It's not always something we get lucky with here. We have, you know, as you guys know, we often get these huge events where it'll snow 5 feet overnight, and you can be sure things are running during that storm, but you might not always see it because it fills back in, right? So it's kind of nice for us to be able to confirm and see all this big activity. These are avalanches from the Mono Lake area. These are some of the avalanches that crossed the highway, that closed the highway for 28 days. This is some aerial imagery looking down at the road. Some pretty large debris piles. And this was the last kind of confirmed persistent slab on that February layer. And once we were into that deep slab cycle, this is on Mount Wood. This could have been another step down activity here. Something breaking higher up on the face, but stepping down in the choke there. But that kind of rounded out our second round of persistent slabs. And I'd say that was the big round last year. And then we had a brief window, about 2 days, where things warmed up quite a bit. Got sunny. It was pretty calm out. Sun came out. And we had this really pretty unique and somewhat challenging condition develop, where we created a sun crust, like a thin melt freeze crust in areas that were exposed to the sun. But then we were also getting those super cold temperatures at night, and we saw some surface faceting again occur during those 2 days. And in areas where you had, and then it snowed another couple feet kind of right afterwards. So we had that weak layer develop, and then we had a slab form right away. And what was interesting about that was that we typically think of persistent slabs and we think of cold north-facing slopes, right? And what we saw from this round was where we were actually seeing more activity was areas that also had that sun. So it was kind of a southeast to northeast was, you know, in hindsight, that's where the activity was occurring. But it ended up being kind of my most stressful cycle of the year because I think by this time everyone was pretty over shoveling and ready to go skiing. And we had sunshine and we had powder, and it was March, and dang it, this is the Sierra. It's springtime. I'm going to go out. So we had quite a few close calls during this time. It was also a relatively shallow slab. Those deep slabs, once we had those 10-foot, 20-foot crowns, those are harder for humans to trigger. But when we had 2-3 feet of snow on this layer, it was a lot easier. So we had quite a few close calls. This was a remotely triggered avalanche on the kind of southeast face on Puzza Bardini in the Sherwins, triggered from the skin track. This was a day full of close calls in the Sherwins. 2 different parties triggered 7 avalanches in 2 different laps on the Mammoth Rock Zone there. And then this image on the left was a solo skier that triggered the fingers. And no one was caught or carried on these avalanches, but that was definitely a day when things were really touchy out there. This is me standing there for reference. This was up on Mono Gym. So again, right over here. And this is that avalanche. This was triggered by a party of two, and that, the person who triggered it rode it all the way to the bottom. Fairly shallow, but running really fast and really far. So this person was not buried or injured. They were able to kind of shake it off and ski out of there. The debris was not huge, but this was happening in many areas. This is another remotely triggered avalanche in the Bishop area. This is V-Bowl in the Lee Vining area. This was a party of two, I believe, who skinned up this face, and you can see their skin track cutting out to the left. And then as they were coming down the ridge, they triggered this remotely, which took out a lot of their skin track. So a good reminder to always watch what's above you. As we got into April, we had I put this one in here. This is an interesting one. This is one of the last avalanches we saw running on that weak layer. This is in that motorized use area out near Deer Mountain, kind of near the craters, if you know where that is. And the people who reported this, they reported this being 2,000 feet wide. So a very short feature, never a big pile of debris, but incredible propagation from this feature. And then the switch flipped after such a cold spring and so much precip. We kind of saw things dry out in April, and we had things kind of got warm, and they kind of got nuclear pretty quick. So we saw quite a bit of wet activity occur. Lots of loose wet activity, some really impressive stuff. This is Navabe Ridge. If you look closely, you can kind of still see that crown line up high from earlier, but down below, you can just see the whole mountain started shedding at a certain elevation there. This is for the climbers in the room. That's Cardinal Pinnacle on the left. This is down near South Lake. This is a really large, loose, wet avalanche. We started to notice, throughout the season, we had a lot of these creep cracks, these glide cracks starting to form. And this was around the time, end of April, is when we started to worry about this stuff. It got so hot so fast. We were kind of starting to think about wet slabs. We were thinking about glide avalanches releasing. This is just kind of highlighting how many cracks were on Mono Gym. This was actually earlier in the year. I think this was, this would have been early April. This photo was taken. So just to round things out for our season last year, this was our final day of a daily forecast. So the day we closed, we had an observation come in, this is the day before we closed. A group was traveling across the ridge here on Mono Gym, triggered a small loose wet that stepped down into this wet slab avalanche that ran all the way to the ground there. So yeah, that really rounded it out for us, starting with an avalanche warning and ending with a human triggered wet slab. It's perfect. And about a week later, we started to see a couple of those glide cracks release. And Ned, did you take these photos? No. But that left image up top, that's the path of the glide avalanche and the debris down below it. And then some more of those cracks that didn't release. But of course, with such a big year, we had plenty of coverage well past April. So people were out there skiing well into the summer months. And unfortunately, we had some incidents occur during our off season. The first fatality that we've seen here in the forecast area in several years, I want to say over 7, which is awesome, but unfortunate to see one this season. It occurred on in the Bishop area out down near South Lake on Herd Peak on the north base. It was a relatively small, loose, wet avalanche. It broke above the party as they were climbing up the slope. Two people in the party, both were partially buried. And one who's marked, the location where they were struck is marked with the X above, was dragged over that rock band and sustained critical injuries. And unfortunately, they did not survive. It's hard to know for sure what the weather was doing beforehand. We were seeing a lot of precip, but it was kind of scattered throughout the range at that time. We were seeing snow at higher elevations and rain at lower elevations. And those were kind of fluctuating depending on where you were in the range. And just given the telemetry in this area, it's hard to know where that rain snow line was for this event, but it's worth noting that there was some recent precip, and that may have kind of made this a more, more sensitive time for that loose wet activity. And it's also focusing on the weather. It's kind of important to note that during the summer months, I think we all, myself included, can think of the spring as a safer, more predictable time of year. But that really kind of changes the deeper into summer we go, when we start to see less and less overnight refreeze. The sun's out a lot longer during the day. Then as we start to see those summer rains, it's a whole different kind of influence on the snowpack than we as winter users are typically used to. Another unfortunate thing with this event is there was continued avalanche threat throughout this rescue process. So the second party marked by the circle up there was able to locate their partner, initiate search and rescue, start medical attention. But they at one point had to retreat from the area because of continued avalanching, and then return to dig them out again. So just a reminder that it gets real out there. We had a second fatality in July on Split Mountain. This event, I'm just going to warn you ahead of time, has very few details. So I can't speak with a lot of confidence around the specifics of this event. But a party of 3 were mountaineers. They had summited earlier in the day. This was mid-afternoon. They were coming back down the ridge here. If you look on the right side of this snowfield, at the very top, you can see an old crown. That is not an avalanche that they triggered. That was an old crown line. But you can kind of see it almost looks like a runnel coming straight down from the kind of rock on that kind of solo rock on the right side. That was their path coming down here. And it's unclear whether a small loose wet triggered naturally or if someone fell and triggered that slide themselves. But what is clear is all 3 members of the party were knocked off their feet, and they slid this whole screen and down out of the shot, down that right side there. And all 3 were injured during this. One sustained a head injury and did not make it out of there, unfortunately. But was able to start walking themselves, start camp for quite a ways. So takeaways from this season as a whole, but I think especially these summer fatality events. Once again, that weather and snowpack. I think it's important for all of us to remember that the snowpack's always dynamic, even in those moments when we think it's safe or more predictable. It's still changing every day. And there's a lot of, factors that go into that. So paying attention to the weather in the summer and starting to think about the different inputs, and how how different are they from the early spring or late winter, when we're more typically used to starting to see those freeze thaw events and getting into that more summer snowpack mindset and those different influences. Terrain nuances. So I put this in here actually for the Mount Hurd event. One thing that was noted during the field investigation is that feature, it's the north face, but that time of year with the sun so high, the top of the north face was receiving sun very early in the morning, and the approach to the base is in the shade for quite a while longer. So that could be one factor. When, often for a loose wet hazard, we're kind of talking about things like monitoring your boot pen and that thaw from the sun, right? But if it's thawing more slowly down low, you kind of need to think about what's happening above you. So just being a little more cautious around, those shade lines, the sun influence, and just, start times. And I think for me, this is not the first time I've thought about this, but it certainly highlights why it's important. But the off-season implications of events like this are notable. I think one is it really highlighted to me the need for continued and strengthened interagency communication even during off seasons. Getting that information out and getting all the emergency services involved right away is important. Late season, off season protocols. So this is not the first time I've thought about this, but we on the east side, I think it's not unique to us, but I think it is certainly emphasized in this region. We see a lot of activity, and not by avalanche activity, but use. We see a lot of use from backcountry recreationalists in the late season, early summer season. So we often see an uptick in visitors to the area and other backcountry users just as we're closing the doors for the season. And it makes me question a lot of how much demand is there? Is there a way we could do better and provide a better service during that time of year? And there's no easy answer because honestly, it kind of comes down to money and staffing. And we make up for a lot with the passion of our forecasters to provide this product, but we also still need a summer job. So people have to leave. And that's part of it. And to me, that really highlights the importance of events like this. Thank you for attending, and also thank you for your support. We really couldn't do what we do already without you. And as we move into a changing winter scene, I think it's only going to get more interesting. So thanks for being here, and thanks again for your support.